Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Dragonus Podcastus. My name is Tiffany, and if you get the reference, good job. Unfortunately, this episode is not all about sunshines, unicorns, or rainbows, but not to worry. If you enjoy grim and dark episodes like this one, you can support us on the Patreon, my Fiverr page, and all that good stuff. Lady Maeve, tell the lovely folks about what you do when you're not here listening to me bore you to death.
Hello, adventurers. Lady Mayfire here. When we are not here on the podcast, I'm usually running Dungeons & Dragons games for kids and adults of all ages. You can check me out on my Start Playing profile, and if you have children between the ages of 7 and 17, they can book me throughout school. This week starts our very D&D winter holiday season. Help save Santa from evil elves, giant gingerbread golems, and candy corn zombies. This game will be running between now and the end of the holiday season. If you've never played D&D before or have not played in a while, you can also contact me for a how to play class through Start Play.
So with that in mind, since we're kind of winding into winter, I figured we'd do something like warm and cuddly, but unfortunately, I ran out of fuel from my magic crystal that produces fire, so we're gonna have to go with something else. But for today, we are talking about basically the first NPC that I ever created, uh, Fern Calemstar, the Black Viper. Now, I have told this story quite a few times, and I've done like revisits and all that, but this is the official, non-disclosed, no details left out version. And to start off, I'm going to start off with a bit of a quote from the guy himself. The Charians are often seen as the scum of mortal kind, but the things they did to me and others like me show that they are beyond our definition of human and delve into abysmal and sickening. They turned me into a weapon to be used as a scalpel against the regime's enemies. Enemies they believe are traitors to humankind for siding with non-humans. The fact that I have become a boogeyman in their eyes of the Charian leadership shows the damage that one person with the right motivation and nothing to lose is capable of. And no one in their inner circle will sleep easy knowing that I am both alive and working to burn down the regime. And I can assure you that the stories that you may have heard about me, if anything, have been, at best, watered down for brevity's sake.
So, from our past podcasts, I know the Charians are the evil empire in this land. Are they more of a military, magical empire, or both?
They're a bit of a combination of
And
both.
and what gives them the power of evil that drives them to destroy the other creatures in the land?
Well, it comes down ultimately to basically what happened during the War of the Blood Moon, which was basically, well, the moon turned to blood red. All the other races except for humans, they basically got affected by this, and some part of them either got enhanced or changed around. Unfortunately, they got the short end of the stick. The giants got the short end of the stick, and they saw all this land around their mountain and said, "Hey, free real estate." Unfortunately, the Charians were too prideful and too arrogant to realize the threat that was sitting right on their doorstep, and the Giants came in. They took out the middling defense force, occupied the town for like 3 months, and then once the Blood Moon was over, they just packed up and left. But there were some people who saw that and they realized if the Giants can do this to us, then what's to stop the dwarves, the elves, the orcs, or any of these other non-human races? We need to band together and we basically need to go on what they refer to as a quote-unquote revenge crusade, because God forbid I can't use the other thing, but that's basically what they're driving force. The other part of their evil is how they also deal with um, magic users and basically who they see as scum. So
Okay, so they've got some motivation going on there that's somewhat legitimate, but not that legitimate.
pretty much. So Fern is basically he's an amalgamation of John Wick, Kirito, a little bit of Anakin. We'll get to that a little bit later. Obi-Wan, Rambo, and believe it or not, John McClane of all people. Fern hates the Charian regime on a level that transcends our definition of hatred. And that is what so many people have sought to understand, and yet so few actually do. And this hatred is a contained flame that Fern has worked so hard to never be fully unleashed, because if he did unleash it, there's a very strong possibility that cities will fall and burn if he's let loose.
So, would you consider Fern to be the ultimate hero of this realm, or will his hate lead to the dark side of the Force, so to say?
He is no hero. He's a damaged soul that's trying to find purpose that doesn't involve, burning down civilizations or spying on people or just, not doing evil things. But he's kind of like a he's like Black Widow. He has a lot of blood on his ledger and he needs to get rid of it, or he needs to own up to it. He's trying to find accountability. So our
Okay, so
oh yeah, our story begins in the city of Ruin on the west side of the continent, of the first continent, in the Western Conglomerate. Fern was born Kual Ijan. I apologize, that name is really hard to pronounce, but he was born to an elven mother and a human father. His mother was a performer of acrobatics, kind of like a circus performer, basically, and his father was one of the advisors to the leader of Ruin, namely the Daimyo. Fern's father was actually highly respected for his tact, his diplomatic skills, and his skill with the katana. And also being within the Daimyo's inner circle of advisors, that also kind of helps there. And there were some that speculated that he was in fact half elf, but this was debunked very quickly. So he goes to one of these performances and he sees Fern's mom, and he was infatuated with her as he would be. And so he left her a bouquet of flowers in her dressing room. Eventually, she found out about this and found out about him and kind of wanted to get to know him more.
so being that it's rumored that he's half elf, in this world, do the elves have like special powers, special abilities, maybe able to tap into nature or magic more?
Well, for most part, most of the elves, they have their own unique brand of like special ability. For Because Fern was born half elf, he kind of has the best of both worlds. He's only got slightly pointed ears, but he's got the dark vision a little bit. He's very charismatic as per the what I've read from the player's handbook. Um, but he's also got like that human side of him that's more like ambitious. He takes a lot after his dad, but he takes a lot after his father, but he does have some of his mother in there too. So, um, yeah.
Okay. In some worlds, half elves are looked down upon. In others, they seem like normal, everyday people. Like you said, he doesn't have the pointy ears. Which is true for this world? Are half elves like just seen as, hey, it's just this guy? Or are they like discriminated against? Or are they like, hey, this is a very special person. He's half elf.
Well, when it's usually the way it kind of works is basically if you are like half of say a non-human, people will say, oh, what part of you like would be that half part? And for example, somebody who is half orc, they may not have like the large canines, and they may not have like a slightly greenish skin, but they've got like the temperament of an orc, or like a kind of like a or like even like the brute strength. But for half elves, they're kind of seen as like they're kind of treated reasonably well, unless you're in Char and they just so happen to catch that, which it's relatively easy to hide something it being half elf, believe it or not.
Okay.
So
So sounds like he can maybe put on a hat and hide any pointiness of the ears.
oh, he has like the Assassin Creed hood that like he when he like needs to like lay low, because he is pretty well known in Char, and if anybody were to like see him, then all hell would break loose, basically. So, on their first date, Fern's father gave his mother a rare flower that only grows in a specific region of the Elven Kingdom and is very hard to get. He basically called in a favor, essentially. Their relationship continued to bloom until they got married, which marked one of the first unions of human and elf. And the daimyo actually officiated the wedding, and 2 years later, Fern was born. The daimyo he blessed baby Fern with something called the Grace of the Serpent, and allowed him to be basically declared as royalty of the Western Conglomerate. However, 5 years after that, tragedy struck our lovable, brooding serial assassin, unfortunately.
So is Grace of the Serpent just a title? Does it give special abilities? Kind of like the gifts of the three fairies in Sleeping Beauty.
Well, basically what it is that he's got, like, the agility, and he's got the grace of, like, a serpent, so, as it says, but it's kind of like how, like, somebody who, takes on, like, an aspect of an animal gets their, like, unique trait. For Fern, he's like, when he moves, it's like he's almost like gliding across the ground, if you will. And this plays into a lot of his skills and his training. So, as I explained
Okay,
before,
so he got a little bit extra dexterity from it, kind of thing.
basically, yeah. So after the Blood Moon and the Revenge Crusade that the Charians went on, they conquered the major cities in the Western Conglomerate, including Run, and Fern's father was on patrol that night when the Charians attacked. I cannot believe I'm making this reference, but everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
Fire Nation.
It's widely believed that that Fern's father died during the initial phase of the siege, and after the Charians conquered Rune and killed the daimyo, they took all the innocent bystanders and basically threw them into the slave market, but the children were sent to a special place called the Spire, and Fern was one of those children. For 15 years, Fern was indoctrinated, trained, and brainwashed into believing in the regime's rhetoric, and he became one of their best agents. And to signify this, he was given the skull tattoo that became synonymous with Char, and he was given the title the Black Viper, which would basically be what he would be known as for the rest of his life, pretty much.
So he was probably about 5, if I'm doing my math correctly, when they took him there. So he was probably very easily influenced. And, child soldiers are never a good sign in an evil empire. There's something morally wrong with that type of society that's using children in battle. But we'll get to that in a bit.
We'll get to that,
It
don't
can also
worry.
backfire.
Oh.
It'll backfire also.
Oh, yes.
Big
yes,
time.
Yes, it can. So, while Fern, as an agent of the regime, he wasn't technically trained as an assassin, and he wasn't actually an assassin. He was trained to be such, but his skills were more in espionage and indirect reconnaissance. So he was kind of like he's like the scout, if you will. There were small snippets of his humanity seeping through the brainwashing. He took up gardening, horse taming, and he actually took on a student after discovering bits and pieces of his heritage. And this student was a street rat that was widely known for causing trouble. And no, it's not Aladdin.
Oh, no Abu. No monkey.
If you watch the Disney Princess episode, you'll understand what happened there. But Fern took pity on this urchin and sought to train him as an honorable warrior. But then an inquisitor came and took his student away to the Spire. And Fern attempted to break in to find his student, but he was unsuccessful, and that guilt racked him. Unfortunately, what emerged from the Spire was no longer Fern's student, and he came to call himself the Silver Viper, both as a way to honor and in some ways mock his teacher.
So I was wondering, in this story, I was wondering if Fern's half-elf heritage was helping him kind of break the programming, break the brainwashing.
It was seeping through just enough, but it wasn't noticeable. At least not yet.
So this is my question before I read the rest. So this will get answered later on. But will the Silver Viper and the Black Viper get reconnected in the future? Maybe someday if the Charian War Machine is defeated.
It's a possibility, but we may never know. So here comes the big important story moment that I always tell this story, but because it really shows off both my creative writing and also how much I've been influenced by Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and all that. But so Fern was sent to the Bathar Mountains to spy on the giants, who were living there, and this is also where he met his future sensei, Master Hiji, who saw his heart and prophesied that Fern would suffer tragedy before finally discovering himself.
So in D&D and D&D 5e, you have different kinds of giants. You got your hill giants, fire giants, storm giants, and so on. Does this world also have that variety of giant types, or is there just like one species that is giant or one culture that is giant?
It's a whole wide variety, and they mostly live in the mountains, but there have been cases where they've been very nomadic and they just travel across the land and all that. They still have that whole thing where um when a giant dies, they have like a massive basically a burial site, which is really cool. Reference to that episode of Xena where David takes on Goliath. Funny enough, that's actually a that's actually that was a modern retelling of the classic story, believe it or not.
I
So
love the storytelling they did in that show. And Xena was one of the top shows back then.
oh yeah, she is 100% a grade A badass. Now, so Fern returns to Char from his mission, and for some inexplicable reason, maybe divine intervention, maybe he was just compelled for no reason at all, he just went to go visit the slave market. And that was where he discovered his mother, barely alive, malnourished, slash marks across her back, and she used the last of her strength to purify Fern's mind from the brainwashing before dying in his arms. What transpired next can only be described as carnage beyond comprehension, akin to Anakin killing the Tusken Raiders. Fern slew everybody in that market. Buyers, sellers, handlers, guards, even the poor guys who cleaned the cells weren't safe, before setting all the slaves free and basically fleeing into the woods. The estimated kill count was believed to be in excess of 105 plus.
And you could probably guarantee there's 10 times that many in slaves. So in lore, where did the freed slaves go to after this? Because obviously they're not going to stay in Char because they might just get recaptured.
So basically, they fled as well, but they fled towards more southern cities, and they fled towards the capital of Tor. They fled towards Taun. They fled towards any city that would take them and would listen to their plight. And some of them even fled north into Cimmeria and the Red Elf territories, and even as far as the ice plains of Zamar. They just wanted to get as far away from Char as possible because they did not want to. And some of them were recaptured. Some of them were killed. Some of them were, you know, they were tracked down. But most of them escaped. But some of them weren't so lucky, unfortunately.
And I'm sure as they fled, they took the stories of Fern's deeds to that location. So probably his legend's growing at this point.
You could say that, yeah. But most people don't even know at that point in time. Didn't know who he was specifically until much later. But they kind of saw him as kind of like a specter, or basically just a myth. Um, and a lot of stories, a lot of rumors, but nothing concrete.
Okay, and did Fern have to evacuate from Char after this, or was it kind of not known that he did all this?
He fled.
I mean, he did kill most of the witnesses.
He did flee after this, after realizing what he did, but he fled, and they did. The regime basically kind of saw this, and they were like, "Oh my God!" He took down an entire slave operation, and the reason, and this is the entire reason why we've had to basically go through a giant Cold War of um, subterfuge and deception and all that. And they dispatched the Silver Viper to basically either bring him in or take him out completely because he knew too much. So eventually,
Ah,
Fern, he was running through the woods, having his like, "What did I just do?" moment kind of thing, and he comes face to face with his former student. They argue over, semantics and what the regime was doing, and Rod declares that he can either bring in Fern back whole or in pieces. And Fern realizes that he was going to have to fight and kill his former student. He didn't want to, but it was a necessary thing. The duel between them was brutal, long, and very intense. And it was actually how Fern got the scars on his eye, which was a result of Ross scoring a lucky hit, basically. But Fern managed to defeat Ra. He took his Shoto sword, or his small sword, and then he fled further into the woods until he stumbled onto the manor of one Count Vincent Deschem, who we'll get to in another episode, don't worry, but he's kind of important here too. But Vincent kind of takes pity on Fern, even after he confessed everything that he did. He gives him, food, medical care, and enough supplies to get him to the capital, including a horse. So Fern gets to the capital. He surrenders himself to the king's guards, is brought before King Fer, which is King Fer's father, and he confesses his crimes and begs to be put to death.
so this kind of sounds like a good opportunity for the king. The enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of deal. And, maybe a little nostalgia there that, hey, this is the son of somebody I admired. Maybe I can get him on my side kind of thing.
Yeah, because in an act of uncharacteristic mercy, and also because, Fahrenheit actually did happen to know Fern's father at one point, he he spared Fern and basically had him go to every nation and faction, learn their culture, their art of battle, and basically kind of act as like a liaison to Tor, if you will.
Sounds like he had a plan to train Fern to take over his daddy's old position one day.
Yeah, so Fern first went to the furthest north of in the ice plains of Zamar and learned from the Zamaran ice fighters. They taught him extreme conditional survival. They showed him their prize secret and taught him how to make one of their trademark knives, to which Fern's own was given a special rune to protect his heart because in the event of, shadow corruption or anything like that. Or, just in case the brainwashing comes back again.
So, do we get to know what this prize secret of the ice fighters is, or is that a story for another day?
Well, I will say it does involve the knives, but it also involves a dragon of all things. So Fern's next stop was going south was to the Orc territory kingdom, and they kind of initially looked down on him until the Orcish princess was threatened by a rival clan and taken hostage. Fern managed to not only save her, but then for that he was welcomed among the orcs as kind of like a friend and brother, and they even did their trademark headbutt on him, and he didn't fall over from it.
That's pretty epic. And if I remember correctly, the orc females fight just as awesome as the males do, which makes capturing that princess no easy feat, which means that his opponents were no pushovers.
No, no. And this princess just so happened to be the chieftain's daughter, and she was a pretty renowned warrior in her own right. So then, after that, he then goes to the Sumerian Empire, which is further south, just before the border with Tor, and he has an audience with the Emperor. The Emperor protects. Gotta have that
Oh
for
no.
Gotta have that.
No.
Gotta have that 40K reference in there somewhere. But he decided he was going to compete in the Burleigh Summer Games. And once the preliminary round starts, of the 240 gladiators that were in there, Fern killed about 150 single-handedly by himself, relatively. And he managed to actually make it to the final round until he was defeated by none other than Count Vincent himself.
It sounds like the gladiator contests of ancient Rome were the first rounds of the day. No one came out of that alive. The more favored gladiators that would survive their matches went on later in the day, but sounds like it was quite the blood sport going on.
Oh yeah, and if it's any indication, the gladiator games are not just for entertainment. They're basically a form of execution for Sumeria's most hardened criminals. And basically, it's basically a way for the criminals to basically go out with honor, because in Sumeria, honor is pretty much everything. And it's funny that you mentioned like the um, games of Rome, because the Gladiator movie. Fun fact about that movie: the real Commodus Aurelius of ancient Rome was nothing like Joaquin Phoenix in the movie. In fact, he was 50 times worse than what was portrayed in the movie. And rather than, dying in the Colosseum, he was actually strangled in his bath. Can you imagine if they tried to recreate that scene in Gladiator? I don't even think Hans Zimmer's soundtrack could have made that scene very good.
A lot of the Roman leaders had a lot of problems with lead poisoning affecting their brains and driving them to crazy madness. There's always the story of the one emperor who nominated his donkey to be a senator because he thought that was an awesome idea.
That's interesting. Emperor Shrek, anybody?
Yeah. We're making waffles!
Oh, God.
That's our new decree. Everybody gets waffles. Bread and waffles. Circuses and waffles.
So, after all of that, Fern traveled to the Red Elf territory, because God forbid YouTube bans me for saying blood. But he learned plains hunting and tracking, close quarter knife fighting, which is pretty much their specialty, and about their red magic rituals. And this is also where he discovered that he was in fact a half-elf, and that he originally came from Rune.
Oh, to get around that whole blood restriction, you can always call them the sanguine elves, or we only drink wine elves. Ah, ah, ah.
Yeah. So then he goes back to Rune, and the new Daniel basically knows of what happened with him, and he basically allows him to sit in on his council meeting. And he kind of freely admits that his deepest regret was that at the time they couldn't protect him or prevent him from being taken. So, and Fern finds out about his family home was still standing, and it turns out it was. And he goes there, and it was still sort of intact. But he finds something that basically caused him to have like a massive breakdown. He found a toy panda, and that was a gift from the Elven King in the southeast. And it was a very, very personal thing for him, because he received that when he was just a baby, and he really liked that toy.
But sounds like this King Ferdinand has set Fern onto a path of healing and finding out who they really are. But of course, being a hero, things don't ever run smooth.
No, they never do. Not with his luck. So his last stop is back in the Bethar Mountains. He actively seeking out the person who would become his sensei, Master Hiji, who is basically a combination of, well, a little bit of Pai Mei, but mostly he's got the appearance of Yoda. But we don't have to worry about that. He doesn't talk backwards, thank goodness. So Master Hiji, he actually counsels with Lady Ishiku of all people, and she agrees to, alongside Master Hiji, to train Fern in the Runian art of the sword, despite the fact that she absolutely hates men. And Fern spends the next 2 months learning, perfecting this art, and eventually he actually forged his own katana, and just like the wind, he vanished into legend. But this is not how the story ends, unfortunately.
So for all our listeners, this is a blast to the past where we spoke about the Bathar monks a few podcasts ago. Don't forget to go back and have a listen if you missed it and learn all about all of the different monks and Lady Ishiku and all of the special abilities they get.
So eventually, Fern was living a relatively peaceful life. He eventually found love, and he married and had 3 kids: Amelia, Shauna, and Teal'c. And while on a hunting trip, he came across a wounded horse. Now, rather than let the horse die or wait to be put out of its misery, he actually took it back to his ranch. He healed it and nursed it back to health. It turns out this horse belonged to one of the maidens from the Sisters of Valkyria, and she suggested that Fern keep the horse, as Gibby, the name of the horse, made her choice about who would be her owner, her eternal. And Gibby was a very rare breed of horse. She is actually a Runian Mustang.
So horses can be some of the hardiest animals on the world, or they can hurt themselves by looking at a picture of air. Being a Mustang, I would expect Gibby to be like small to medium size, pretty good on steep trails and mountainsides, and probably has a good head on their shoulders. Probably not spooking at the wind or, you know, doing any of the more sillier horse things that, some horses get up to.
You know, Max from Tangled?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind
Yes.
of Gibby's
I
kind of
have the picture.
Gibby's like that a little bit, except she's not like, she doesn't try to chase down a criminal, and by the end there's no like guard that is all using like all frying pans. Although frying pans can be fun if you're a hobbit.
I cast iron! Clang.
Pretty much. So unfortunately, Fern's past seemed to catch up with him. He was riding into town for supplies like he always did, and just kind of like the plot of the first John Wick, things happen where the guys see the horse, they want to buy the horse, it's not for sale, that kind of thing. But he says this in Charian, which really pisses him off. And these punks that wanted to buy the horse, they track him down to his home, and in the middle of the night, they actually attack him and his family and kill the horse, which this bit's always hurts for me personally because of how much I love horses. But they also go the extra mile and they kill Fern's wife and they kill his youngest daughter, Amelia. Thankfully, though, Teal'c and Shauna weren't home at that time.
Oh, bad move on their part. They chose poorly.
Very poorly. And just like John Wick with the puppy, the fury that Fern had buried for so many years just came flooding back, and he was just ready to burn Char to the ground because, as it turns out, that punk that killed his wife, daughter, and the horse was the son of the head of one of the Charian houses, who just so happened to be on the Charian council. My son, it is not what you did that angers me to such a point where I want to wring your neck. It is who you did too. Who? That nobody and his grunkar of a wife and daughter? That nobody is the Black Viper. Oh. He used to be our best agent. We called him Halashutas. The boogeyman? Well, he wasn't exactly the boogeyman. He was the one you sent to scare the feckin' boogeyman. He is a man of focus, determination, sheer uncompromising will. He once killed 5 men in a tavern with a spoon. With a fucking spoon. Why a spoon, cousin? Why not an axe? Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more. I have to do that. I love that.
Love that quote from Robin Hood. It'll hurt more.
Unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent.
I was thinking of the scene where Robin Hood Men of Thieves, the comedy one.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that scene where he came home when you said Fern's family was slaughtered.
Yeah.
And they take away the castle on wheels, everything's been repossessed. His dog died, his cat died, his budgie died because the cat choked on it. It's like everyone's dead. Except Blinken and the cameraman.
Oh God. And that And then suddenly he just up and left. It was over a woman. His mother that used to be in our slave market. We had the misfortune of mistreating her because she was an elven witch. What we didn't realize was that she was the mother of our greatest weapon. She ended up dying in his arms, but not before purging his mind of our programming. He takes a dramatic swig of expensive wine. The bodies that laid there on that day set the foundation for how we would conduct ourselves in the future, all because of one man.
So I'm just picturing this very cinematically in a movie, and I'm just waiting for Fern to either burst in through a window on a rope or just step silently from the shadows and murder both of them.
That would be something he would do 100%, but not today, unfortunately. And then
Not today,
not,
unfortunately.
and then my son, 2 days ago during a council meeting, the Black Viper walks into the chambers, bloodied and bruised, and says that you killed his wife, his daughter, and his feckin' horse. He was holding a large bag. The bag contained the heads of 5 of our best agents. Nothing compared to him, of course. He demanded that we turn over whoever committed this act, or else he would come back and take the heads of all of our best captains next until somebody revealed where you were. And right now, I'm tempted to hand you over to him. He will come for you, my boy, and you will do nothing because you can do nothing. Now leave before I have you thrown onto the streets.
Sounds to me like a cowardly noble trying to cover up their behind and not get blamed for their own orders that they gave their son.
Oh, his son acted on his own volition. That was not had
Oh.
nothing to do with he had nothing to do with it. He was just like he said, he was just trying to cover his ass. But his days were his days were pretty much numbered, and that kid suffered very greatly at the hands of the Black Viper, and that's
We
what
have a saying that there is dumb and there is stupid, and this kid did the stupid.
exactly, and that's one of the reasons why they never bothered to try to go after him in any way. And before the Blood Moon acclamation was signed, the Charian sent a lone assassin to kill Farangad. He succeeded, and the knights who saw him claimed that he was carrying a mortal blade, and he wielded the power of the shadows. Yet it seemed like it was almost like he was the Black Viper, to which Fern denied that very openly, but he could only ponder what this meant.
And I can just okay, so I'm now seeing that his student is entering the picture again. And I can just see a future where Fern will just take apart the Charian Empire bit by bit for payback for the death of his family and maybe to find this lost student of his. It sounds like they need to have a long talk, and talk is in quotation marks.
Oh God, yeah, and um, not saving the big surprise for later, but let's just say that in this world, if you are killed and you have like a strong emotional tie to the world, such as rage or anger or hate, you can't actually come back from death. But no spoilers yet. Uh, so last little bit before we wrap up here, and some mini facts. Fern actually holds the rank of captain unofficially in the Taurian military, and he leads an elite team composed of some of the best warriors in all of the Taurian kingdom, and they've come to call themselves Viper Team, much to Fern's he's just kind of cringing at that idea, but he kind of went along with it. And now a few years later, after his family's murder, Fern would eventually remarry, though they didn't have any children after that. But Fern's new wife came to basically adopt Shauna and Teal'c as her own. However, circumstances and the certainty of war forced them apart, and she went on to lead the underground that continues to fight against the Charian regime, while Fern kind of worked on the outside. And every once in a while, they would meet up at a secluded waterfall and just catch up, if you will.
And I'm very glad that Fern is able to find some love after all the tragedy. You know, maybe life isn't so bad anymore, but I'm sure he still has some issues with the Charian Empire that he'll be working out in the future.
Yeah, he doesn't generally go to Char very often anymore unless he has a really good reason, or unless he's given permission, which Sometimes he, like, if the king says, "Oh, you don't go to Char," it's kind of basically a way of saying go to Char and mess some stuff up, basically.
Who will rid me of these horrible people? And then the guards just leave and take care of the people.
Exactly. So
Code words.
some mini facts. Fern is actually based quite a bit actually, on my personality, because he's kind of more of my character insert. He's actually ambidextrous. Um, However, because I'm a lefty, he is also a lefty, but he's ambidextrous. But I'm also a lefty too. But I've transitioned to also becoming ambidextrous.
It's fun to be able to switch between both hands for a task. I'm also ambidextrous. I used to be able to write really good with both hands, but unfortunately I broke my left hand at one point. It was actually one bone in my pointer finger, but after that I couldn't do handwriting with that hand anymore.
Anyway, so yeah, another little fact here. Fern's sword his first sword was actually made by a Charian smithy. The blacksmith who made it stole the works of the best Runian swordsmith to fashion that blade. And after he, went through everything that he went through, he basically became a Ronin, which is basically a samurai or sword master without a person to serve, until he met Master Hiji, who taught him this purifying ritual, which he used to reforge his katana into something far better than what it used to be.
So I know he learned something about runes with the Ice Masters. Um, did he know enough to be able to put anything into this blade?
Yes, actually, he put one, at least one or two runes on there, but they're basically just basic protection runes that protect his soul. But that's pretty much it. There's nothing true that special about the runes. Um, Fern holds the longest streak as the Burleigh Games champion for 5 consecutive seasons.
Are the games always so deadly like the Roman Colosseum, or are they sometimes like the Olympics where only the best warriors will meet, test their skills, but like, maybe one or two people die, but not everybody dies?
Well, basically, there's the preliminary round where all the warriors who signed up go up against the gladiators, and they fight until all the gladiators are dead, or the gong rings, and then they go into the 1v1 section where it basically goes into like a basic tournament, and there are like actual like Olympic competitions. It's not just like a bloodbath sport, but um the games are like varied quite a bit. And then
Okay,
finally,
so it's not just blood sport all the time.
so basically the reason, and also, so another thing is the reason why Fern doesn't seem to age, despite admitting that he's at least 54, is because the night he was attacked, he actually died. And the gods above made him an offer. Basically, they would give him immortality and basically the ability to regenerate, and in exchange for the task of hunting down the Silver Viper and taking down the Charian Regime and the threat across the sea. And once the Silver Viper is slain, he would be allowed to basically regenerate and see his daughter and horse.
So this reminds me very much of a group of warriors from another world. The World is Discworld by Sir Terry Pratchett, and it's kind of a comedic take on our world mixed with D&D, mixed with British humor. And they have a group of barbarians there that are called the Silver Horde. And the reason they are the Silver Horde is they are so good at being warriors that they just don't die. It's made up of Cohen the Barbarian, Mad Hamish and his Wheelchair of Death, Boy Willie, who's like 90, Caleb the Reaper, Teach, who's just a poor person they've grabbed and dragged along with them, Truckle the Uncivil, Old Vincent. They know the meaning of fear. It happens to other people.
Yeah.
But they're just so good at not dying that they haven't died yet. And they're like 90, 80, 75 years old, and they're still being, it's kind of like Conan the Barbarian. They're out there doing barbarian things, but they just can't die.
Well, one could argue that Conan isn't really a barbarian. He's actually more of a fighter that's just really specced into strength. So the
That is true. I loved the Conan the Barbarian cartoons, and not cartoons, I'm sorry. They were comics growing up, and books and novels and things. It was always such a good storyline.
I actually got introduced through the movies. I actually like Conan the Destroyer more than the first Conan, even though the first Conan is like really good. It's really it's really good. Because it's got James Earl Jones as the villain. Because that was a rare thing that happened where James Earl Jones got to be the villain in an Arnold movie. That was a fantasy movie. Um,
Everything's better with James L. Jones.
yeah. So the final fact, little bit there is Fern was actually close friends with one of the Power Rangers. Now it's a Red Ranger, but it's not the one you're thinking of. It depends on which Red Ranger we're talking about here, because there's like a dozen now.
There's there's a billion of them.
I won't.
There's
I won't spoil who it is because I want to save that for another day.
I think every 2 to 4 years we get a new Ranger Corps that does. We got the dinosaurs, we've got the rescue vehicles, we've got the original set. There was like Time Cop ones. There's just so many different Power Rangers groups out there.
They had like Power Rangers as police officers. That was really cool, actually. I thought that was really cool.
Yes, they had like all the police vehicles and ambulances and stuff that would come together to make the Zoid. Uh, I remember the dinosaur version. Um, there was like a superhero version thing, I think. I want to think so. Just anything kids are interested in, they did a Power Rangers for.
There was actually one that actually took advantage of the whole fact that they're like martial artists. They played into the martial arts bit, which was Jungle Fury, which they basically just channeled like animal spirits. It's really funny because um it's often like there are like some series that are seen as like really bad, but there are ones that are like held in like super high regard. Believe it or not, the original Pink Ranger, Amy Jo Johnson, she starred in a TV series called Flashpoint, which is basically it's Canadian SWAT, but it's really cool actually. Um, it's a really good show. I have the series. It's really good. Anyway, um, that's Fern in a nutshell, basically. What are your thoughts before we wrap up here?
I think he's got a pretty solid hero foundation. He's got the trauma that gives him his drive. You know, horrible things has happened. He's trying to overcome it. He's got his grudge with the Charian Empire, so you know that there'll be run-ins with that. I think this would be a really cool NPC for the players to have to interact with. Yeah, they're probably outmatched by him, but it might be that, hey, you need some training, so we're going to put you with the Viper Squad, and they're going to teach you how to do XYZ. So it could kind of be like a mentorship thing for your players in game to have to deal with him, or maybe they're on a diplomatic mission and he's their guard. It's very versatile character that you could use in game.
Well, one of the things also that makes him like the way I like to use him is I like to have him like he's just kind of hiding up in the tree there and they're getting attacked by like say dire wolves or something and he's like, all right, I'm gonna help him out, and he like fires an arrow. I actually had an incident where I rolled a one and the arrow bounced off a tree and hit somebody in the foot. Um,
Oh no.
I
Friendly
tried.
fire isn't so friendly.
Geneva Convention, more like
Whoops.
Geneva Suggestion.
As I say, Geneva is not a country in this world, so the Geneva Convention hasn't been written yet. So you're welcome to write your own, but right now there are no rules. It's war.
Basically, yeah. And the way I like to use him is I like to use him kind of like a travel guide. Like you're trying to get through an area, and he knows the way around, and you kind of like you don't hire him, but he's more like assigned to you, or he'll meet you like in a place, and he also has like a bit of an Aragorn vibe too because he's just really good at surviving in the wild. He has a particular specialization in dealing with herbal medicine, believe it or not. particularly, well, as we know it as King's Foil, but it's Athelas, which is basically, as Sam so eloquently puts it, it's a weed, which I didn't even know that, but basically it just cures basic poisons and all that. But he's got a knack for like herbs and all that and gardening and all that. And uh, when when Gibby died, he found another horse. He named her Midnight, and she is basically she's if I had to describe her, she's kind of like imagine the most beautiful horse you've ever seen in your entire life, and but it has the sass of like a regular person who's just unbelievably sassy.
It's fun to do that with if you in D&D you can get a druid to come out and awaken an animal, which basically makes it smarter, and it can talk. And they could do it to plants too. So if you want some real fun, have the horse talk back. Have the the favorite animal of the hero just argue with them every step of the way.
That's funny because
Or bargain for carrots, you know?
or apples.
Yeah, apples, carrots, donuts. They love donuts. They shouldn't get too many of them, but
I mean, you're the horse expert. I'm not very. I know a little bit about horses, but not that much. I've never.
horses are my hyper focus. So yeah, horses are my hyper focus.
Anyway, next time on Dragon Ball Z, we'll find out if Goku actually makes it and goes to power level 9,000.
Next week on Dragon Ball Z, we'll be looking for the 7 Dragon Balls again.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.